back in. Come on back in. Sorry about that. I had to restart the stream because I had a little bit of a technical glitch there in the first 5 minutes. So my apologies on that. Hopefully you guys don't have an issue coming back in. I have to be considerate, all right? I have to be considerate of my podcast people. They're not going to want to sit there for, 5 minutes waiting on my live stream to get started. So, there's no reason for me to edit it out either. But y'all come on through. Come on back in. Let me get this shared out. And we will get started here. I have a very interesting live stream for you guys today. Very interesting. As the title says, voice testimony, all right, of a police officer meeting some extraterrestrials and boarding their craft for an examination. What's up with it, Gino? How are you? How are you? Good. You were able to make it back in. Listen, guys, we are about to learn some things here, all right? I don't know about learn, but alien beings are here, okay? They're here. And many people, even people that have had an abduction experience, say that they are not our friends. Now, I believe that Satan is absolutely building his own so-called human army, right? But if you really, that's like a culmination of many years of research, things like that, and why I say that. I also think there's a lot more to even like the Holocaust that happened, that sort of a thing. And could it have been a way that the devil was trying to kill every single Jewish person on this earth because they were, selected by God? I don't know. But I don't believe that their true agenda is being told to us. And I also don't believe that every single one of these beings that we see necessarily come from another planet. I'll be honest about that. Now, listen, John Lear, who has now passed away, a man who has built many aircraft and was also, and we're kind of going into like the missing 411, UFO connection, all that sort of a thing. Just bear with me here. George Knapp, right? Knapp he's worked out there in Vegas for many years, journalist. And there's a little clip that I want to show you guys when he sat down with John Lear. They talked about how there are beings of a different species here on Earth with us. They are a lot more advanced. It's almost hard for a human being to stomach that there could be anything else on this earth that's smarter than us or even has more technology than us. But listen, are y'all ready? Let's go.
Hello and welcome to On the Record. Those of you who joined us last week were probably amazed, as I was, by some of the latest research in the field of UFOs. There is so much to talk about, however, we were unable to fit it all into one program. So my guest again this week is UFO researcher, former state Senate candidate, and award-winning pilot John Lear. Mr. Lear, nice to have you here again.
Always a pleasure to be here, George.
To begin with, we have this concept of the people from other planets as little green men. Are they green from what you know? Are they all the same, or we got different kinds of them?
George, there's at least 70 different species and probably more. But yes, as odd as it sounds, there are little green men. That's not the ones we usually see, though. We see the little gray ones. They're about 4.5 feet tall. We see the ones that are called the Nordics. They're about 7 feet tall, look like us, but they're invariably blonde hair and blue-eyed. They're one of the species that we have on ice. One of their crashes we recovered.
Obviously, with different species, they have different motives. I mean, are there Are there good aliens and bad
There are
aliens,
good
from what you
aliens
know?
and bad aliens and all kinds of ways and reasons for interacting with us.
And what are some of the reasons? Why would they be here?
Genetic experiments, trying to, there's a misconception here. People think that our space brothers would bring us, good things and teach us how to get rid of all our diseases. And, if you stop and think about it, that may not be the best thing, because if you had a society without any disease and everybody starts living 150 years, that creates a lot of problems. So they would not meddle in that way.
You believe, in part, that the movies E.T., Close Encounters of the Third Kind, were not entirely just the creative products of some Hollywood director, that maybe there's more to that. Why don't you explain?
They were carefully guided by representatives from MJ12, who is this organization that is in charge of the cover-up, in order to get us ready for the release of the information that there are indeed aliens. And in both those movies, they used small little creatures and in order to get us ready for this release of information.
To prepare us that the idea of benevolent aliens from outer space are going to help us out.
Unfortunately, they're not so benevolent. So they made probably one of the most disastrous mistakes when E.T. was put out. At that time was before we discovered what I call the double cross or the grand deception. And they were trying to get us used to the benevolent little creatures, but that isn't the case.
Why don't you take a couple of minutes? Now, you've done as much research on UFOs as just about anyone, I'd imagine. And if you haven't done it, you know people who have. Where did it all start, and how have we put this picture together of where they came from and why they're here?
Well, the whole thing started in July 2nd, 1947. That was the first crash.
First crash of an alien spaceship.
Of an alien spaceship. July 6th is when they recovered it and sent it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. July 7th is when they held the press conference and told the people it was a weather balloon, which the press bought hook, line, and sinker. September of that year, President Truman established MJ12, and the purpose of that was to study the saucers and cover up the existence of UFOs.
And you say we recovered alien bodies from that incident, right?
4 from that particular crash, yes.
And what'd they do with them?
They autopsied them. Dr. Detlef Bronk was the chief surgeon, so to speak. He was the one that named them EBEs. It stands for extraterrestrial biological entities. And we captured 3 live EBEs.
Hey, Third Eye.
They were numbered in their order of capture. EBE1, EBE2,
Hey,
and
IGT.
EBE3.
Where did we capture? Where did this happen?
In different crashes. EBE1 lived with an Air Force colonel between 1949 and 1952. The EBEs are kept in an electromagnetic facility called a YY-2. It was designed by a Dr. Eric Wang, who worked directly for Dr. Kissinger, who has been in this cover-up since the very beginning. The reason they had to create an electromagnetic facility is the fact that the EBEs are so advanced. They're at least 500 million years advanced from us, and probably more. They can move by thought.
Move by thought.
And they can also disappear. But they can't move by thought through electromagnetic facilities. So they built this facility. There was 2, one in Los Alamos and one either at Edwards or up at the test site.
At Groom Lake, Nevada.
At Groom Lake. Now, there's still one EBE still living, EBE3, and there is a videotape that eventually is going to be released to the public, and it's an interview with him. As hard as that may sound, as hard as that may be to believe, there is a videotape of an interview with EBE3.
And what is this language that the interviewers are?
I haven't seen the tape, so I don't know. But on this trip I told you I took gathering all this information, a guy in Albuquerque handed me 25 secret CIA memos. And if anything can be humorous in all of this, one of these memos, in the body of the text, it said, by the way, EBE3 wants to see the ocean. We better make the arrangements or he'll disappear again. So while he couldn't get out of this facility, he could make himself disappear and cause him a lot of trouble.
Now, can they exist among us? Is that what you're saying, or do they have to have this special environment?
They have special environment, special air. It's my understanding they can only last about 20 minutes in this air.
You were saying also these gray ones are the ones that we see most of the time, and you said that most of that there are a lot of different motives for them being here. The gray ones, what kind of a deal we got going with them? Is that the bunch that you suggest we've made a deal with for military technology?
Well, I think we made a deal with them, and their ultimate what they want to do is regenerate their own race. Now, apparently, they've either had some kind of nuclear accident, or they're on the backside of a evolutionary genetic curve, and they're going downhill instead of uphill. In other words, in the autopsies, of which I have two, we found out that their digestive system is atrophied. They can't eat through their mouth anymore. You know how they eat? Well, these cattle mutilations, they take the hormones and the enzymes from those cattle and they spread it on their skin, and their skin absorbs the nutrients and then excretes the waste back through their skin.
Oh my gosh, hold up. I see you. I'm on a troll account, babe. Listen, we talked about this a couple of years ago. Remember when we talked about the what was it? The Blue Planet Project? You all remember that? May not. But we talked about the Blue Planet Project, and we talked about how some of these beings obtain nutrition. And it was actually documented in the Blue Planet Project PDF that some beings soak their hands in human blood. And it literally soaks into their body, and it provides them the nutrition that they need. They don't eat like us, right? Very interesting. It's also too, if you think about what the Bible says about how the blood is, life, and you should never consume blood, that sort of a thing. Just interesting.
And if you read Whitley Strieber's book or listen to him talk, he talks about when he's seen them doing this to their skin, and they're scraping the waste off.
Now, these cattle mutilations, there's been a film made about that, and perhaps in a couple of minutes we can take a look at some excerpts of that.
Yeah, Strange Harvest was a good one. But another thing that happened here on March 4th, there was a documentary released on the best UFO photos that have been taken so far, including 1 minute and 38 seconds of videotape. Now, what happened is in November, this guy took these photos, took it into the TV station. They thought it was great, but nobody would believe it. So they spent 3 months checking the validity of the, authenticating the videotape and checking out the credibility of the witness. And when they had it all down, they put out this documentary, 30 minutes. I mean, it's ironclad. They're here. But do you think it got on the network? No, it was just showed locally in Pensacola.
We have some of that, and perhaps when we come back, we can take a look at it. So stay with us for more of On the Record.
Gotta love those old documentaries, huh? Hey, Lavina, how you doing? All right, so listen. There has been an increase in UFO sightings in Ukraine. And we've talked about this as well. Recently with the war that has been going on between Russia and the Ukraine, there has been an actual increase in UFO sightings out there. Now, why would that be? Well, there has been some theories that, for one, there's human beings, right? Harvesting DNA, harvesting, body parts, that sort of a thing. But on top of that, there's also talk about the fact that these beings want to capture and harvest our souls because they don't have one. They don't have a soul like me and you. Let me just read something to you really quick. Give me just 1 second before we get into this. And by the way, speaking of Nixon, and I something very interesting. Jimmy Carter, former President Jimmy Carter, when he was advised that UFOs were real, when he was briefed on this classified information, remember, Jimmy Carter promised the United States people that he was going to make sure that we knew the truth, all right? But he never came out with anything. He never kept his promise. of revealing that classified information to the public. Now, according to a story that was corroborated by more than one witness, US presidents are only given a cursory overview of the subject. Apparently, the CIA runs this program and they only provide information to the president on a need to know basis and do not consider presidential curiosity as sufficient need to know. This was implemented after Kennedy, and all presidents after him have been given only summary briefings. Some presidents, for unknown reasons, were given more than others, like Reagan. Now, President Carter was a deeply religious person who had also witnessed a UFO with 6 other people. Everyone thought he would be the one to finally release UFO information to the public, but as the story goes, he was repeatedly stonewalled. And eventually, the CIA had the talk with him. And afterward, it was reported that he sunk his head in his hands and not only began to deeply sob, but was visibly disturbed for some weeks afterward. What was he told? What was he shown? Well, this is what he was told, and I don't believe this, that major religions, including Christianity, were programs created by these ETs to prevent us from destroying ourselves while they ran their experiments on us, and that they made us. I don't believe that. I feel like if they made us, they would look a lot better than us instead of looking like they've been half burnt in a radiation oven, okay? And all sticky and stuff. They wouldn't be able to, they don't get to enjoy food like we do. All right, I guess it's pros and cons to being an alien. But listen to this for a second. I'm just going to read an excerpt here. All right. There was an email correspondence from Ted Smith, all right, or I'm sorry, Ted Rice, to Stewart, who runs the Alien Talk podcast, all right? And this is his thoughts on the whole thing. He feels like some of it has to do with racial purity, all right? That the Nazi Germans were controlled by an unknown and unseen leader who was attempting to purify the German race they had created in humanity. Primary goal was to clean out inbreeding with other races, particularly the Jews. They also say that there's various leaders over assigned districts of Earth, all right? And of course, we know that there's various different skin colors of human beings here on Earth, all right? But what they're saying is that different races have different alien leadership, all right? Listen, I'm just spreading the word. Don't shoot the messenger. Now, there was an abduction from a cotton patch in Mississippi, and in this event, the abducted felt he was cloned, all right? After being cloned, the 2 leaders had a conflict over who I belonged to. There was the Nordic-looking man who took little clone Teddy out on the stage to be presented to all these genetically modified creatures because of the new modified cloning program. And then there was the little small guy with dark hair, pointed like a widow's peak, and an almost crooked nose. But the Nordic had the upper hand. The little guy seemed to have lost out in the struggle. He showed his displeasure by stomping his foot at the result. Under hypnosis, I saw through the illusion of finding the handsome Nordic human looking leader's face to be none other than the dinosaur shaped head of a reptilian. I saw the little guy as a small gray wearing makeup and costume to present himself as a little human man. Result: grays and reptiles in their coalition to control programs in humanity to reap a common reward of human misery, pain, and grief. This type of program extends today between Christians, Jews, and Islamic people. The racial prejudices in the United States with non-white humans continues today. Look at the recent rise in Aryan skinheads and their objectives, and ask yourself where this thinking and attitude come from. As I've said before, the reptiles seem to be in charge and the Greys are subservient. So I believe that the Holocaust was a pre planned program to create a grand harvest, and as usual, it was cleverly designed so that humans would not figure out the true nature behind it all. Let me bring something up really quick. So this is I want to bring up voice testimony of a man named Herbert Shermer. Herbert Shermer. He talks about being taken aboard a UFO in Nebraska on December the 3rd, 1967. Let's just listen.
2:30, actually, I think was the time that this happened, but right around 2:20, I was just checking two gas stations. I left the two gas stations, I left the last gas station that I checked to pull onto the highway, and I was making radio contact with the Wahoo Sheriff's Office because we didn't have radio communications available in the city at nighttime because we couldn't afford it. So I told them that everything was all secure. I pulled onto the highway and putting the mic down, I seen some flashing lights in front of me. First appeared to me to be a truck, I thought. As I got closer and put the high beams of the lights in the patrol car on this object started raising. These lights started raising up in the air to about 40 feet. I think I was something like 50 yards from this. These lights were flashing, and as they got bigger, as I got close to it, it seemed like they were red flashing lights coming out of a porthole, which sort of circled the craft. It had like a catwalk going around the center of it. It was shaped like a football, very metallic, like a very shiny bumper, if you polished a bumper on a car. It had sort of a reddish, orangey glow coming from beneath it. And then there was this white flash that came on to me in the patrol car. It felt as if we were being pulled. And then it was being pulled. You know, we were being pulled up the side of this bank to the left of the road and up toward this field, the car and I. I felt nothing. At first I felt kind of stunned and shocked, and then I felt sort of tingly. And as the car and I moved up the bank to the top of this field, this object landed and some legs came out and it sat down. I was just sitting there really motionless. I couldn't move. I may have even had my mouth open. I don't remember, being probably scared. This hatch came open. And this light came out of the hatch, and this form came down and looked the form of a human being. And this form started walking toward the patrol car with an object in both its hands. Appeared to be hands. And he was walking straight toward the patrol car. As he was doing this, another form came out and started walking toward the patrol car also. As this being got in front of walked up to the front of the patrol car with this object in his hand, which looked sort of a squarish oval type. It looked like it had a lens in front of it. And the only thing I could think was, oh my God, what's going to happen now? And this green light came out all over the car, and then sort of like went back in again. And I felt a sensation then, and then I felt nothing, like I was just there and that was it. And this other being started walking up toward the car. I was sitting straight, looking straight. I couldn't even move my head. And he walked up to the car, and the window was about 3/4 of the way rolled down, and he had an object in his hand, a silver object that looked like a big pencil with a round ball on the end of it. And he pressed this against the side of my neck, which I felt some pain from, and said, ouch. Then he stepped back, and I sort of sat there, and he opened up the car door and just went like this. And I sort of raised up out of the patrol car, and I was looking at him, and he was looking at me. And he said, "Are you the watchman of this town?" And my response was, "Yes, sir." He said, "Come with me, watchman." And we started moving toward the spacecraft, and it felt like I was walking on air. We got up to the hatch to where you went inside of the spacecraft, and we just sort of like floated up into the first level. And he says to me, "Watchman, come with me." And we were in a circular room, and there were a lot of cylinders about 4.5 feet high and about 2 feet wide that circled the whole room. And it had sort of like a cable running through it, 2 cables running through these. They looked like tall batteries to me. And then in the center of this room was a huge cocoon, or, you know, like this shaped object, was spinning, and it was giving off colors like the rainbow, and was about 20 feet long. And it seemed like these cables were coming up and connecting to these 2 block things that came down on each end of it. And we walked the complete circle in there. And I said, "What is this?" And he said, "This is how our craft operates." And he said it operates on electrical reversible magnetism. And then I looked at him, and he said, "Come with me, watchman." And we walked back over to where I came up in with him, and this glass sheet came down. And we stepped onto this, which I felt, and we moved up into the second level of the craft. And lo and behold, I've never seen anything like it before in my life, with so many different types of instrument panels and computer type things that you just wouldn't believe it. This cone thing was right in the center of the floor. You could see half of it from on top and half of it from the bottom, but it gave off a red glow that sort of not flashed, but kind of died down and then came back up again. And he says, "Watchman, come with me." And we walked over to a screen that was up on the side, I say wall. And it was sort of like a TV screen. And he pressed some buttons and I guess flipped some switches. I wasn't paying too much attention to him. I was looking at the screen. And some stars in the sky appeared on there. And he put his finger up like this, and he said, "This is where we're from, watchman." And then he put his hand back down. He didn't say where, and he didn't say the name. He just pointed. The purpose that we're here is to get electricity. And there was another being standing a little distance away, and the man turned to him, and they both looked at each other, and he started depressing buttons. And he says, "Watch, watchman." And there was this antenna on the outside of the spacecraft, which angled toward a power unit, and this bolt went out, a color I've never seen before in my life, and I don't even think I could describe it, went out and came back. And this stayed like this for about 3 minutes, and then it went off. And he turned and looked at me, and I felt as I was getting a very, very, an awful lot of roll of input of words that I couldn't understand. And he reached up and he touched me on the shoulder, and he felt real when he touched me, and I think at that time I did touch him. and he felt real to me. And he says, "Watchman, come with me." We walked back over to the exit, I'll say, where we came up, and the glass sheet came down again, and we went up into the third part of the craft, which was the observation deck, he said. As we stepped off, he said, "Watchman, come with me." And we walked over, and we were standing there looking out of a big plate glass window type thing. And there was a control panel right in front of it, and there were two chairs that looked like dentist chairs. You know, I've been to the dentist chair, but really a superstructure of a chair, better than a dentist chair. We looked out the window, and I could see this one being walking back and forth by where my patrol car was. And I think I said, "Wow." And he didn't. He turned to me and he said something I don't understand. And he said some more things that I didn't understand or couldn't make out. And I still don't. And then he pointed his hand toward the plate glass window, as I say, refer to the stars out there. And he says to me, "Watchman, one day you yourself will see the universe as I have." And he reached up and he touched me on the shoulder. Like this, you know, like grabbing you on the shoulder, like a man does, to steer you away. And he says, "Come with me, Watchman." And then he stopped. And he said, "Watchman." And I turned around like this to look at him. And it felt like I was getting more input of something that I couldn't understand. Then he says, "Watchman, come with me." We walked over and we went down all the way out of the craft. As we got outside, this other being started walking back toward the spacecraft and boarded it. As we were walking toward my patrol car. And we stopped right by the patrol car, and I turned to look at him, and he was looking at me. And then again, it felt like I was receiving an input of words of some kind that I couldn't understand. And he sort of lifted his hand, and then he turned and walked back to the spacecraft, floated up inside. This catwalk thing started spinning. The lights started flashing off and on. This red orangish glow came out from beneath it. It started lifting up in the air, and I guess it got about 100 feet high and just shot straight out of sight. Let me tell you, I was scared. I started feeling me again. When I was aboard the spacecraft, I had hardly no feeling at all. My body was tingling. I was perspiring. I was hot. I felt nauseated. I got back into the patrol car. I turned it around, and I headed back for the police station. On the way to the police station at a high rate of speed, I tried to make communication with Wahoo Sheriff's Office, and it appeared the radio was dead. I got to the station, I jumped out of the car, and a fast walked into the police station, and I noticed that the wall clock in the police station said 1 minute after 3 a.m. Well, I went directly to the bathroom. I have to go to the bathroom, but to drink water, because I was hot. And I walked back into the main room of the police station. We had a real small police station. It was about 20 by 20. And I sat there at the table, and I lit a cigarette, and I said, "Wow, what the hell happened?" Something happened to me. Did I really see a flying saucer? Did this really happen to me? I looked at my report log, and I remembered through all the training and everything I went through that regardless of the nature or what it was, put it in your report book because you just might need it. So I looked at my report book and I got my pen out and I wrote, at 2:30 a.m., December 3rd, 1967, I saw a UFO at junction 6 and 63, believe it or not. About 6:30 that morning, a fellow officer came in and I explained to him what happened to me. And the fellow officer says, I believe you, Herb. One time I was on my way to Wahoo, Nebraska, and I was driving down the road. I looked over. Lo and behold, there were two UFOs sitting in a field, and these little green men were out there walking around it, waving at me. I said, sure, Paul. And he says, I don't think you should tell anybody, Herb, because I don't think anybody's going to believe you. Matter of fact, you're going to lose your job if you tell the people. But I said, Paul, it's the truth. He said, well, he said, a lot of people won't even accept the truth. I said, well, I'll wait for the chief. He says, no, I'll go on home. So I went home, and I was, I really felt like everything was drained completely out of my body, and I laid down on the couch. And as I laid there, I started getting a buzzing feeling in my head. And it felt like I had pressure on my body. I couldn't move my arms. I couldn't, how you try to open up your mouth and you can't say help? I was trying to say help, And then I went off to sleep and the phone rang and it was the chief. And the chief says, get your butt down to the station right now. What is this? You mean you've seen a UFO? I said, I don't feel good. I'm sick and I'm not coming down to the police station. He said, I'll be right over. So the next thing, TV came in, press came in, newspapers, radio stations, and telephone calls started coming in. 2 days later, the ridicule started coming in, believe me. And I had a man run 3 blocks, huffing and puffing. He owned the Goodyear tire shop there in Ashton, Nebraska, and he wrote me, Herb, if you ever see another flying saucer and it lands, you tell him I want to sell him a set of tires. The phone rang, this is the planet Mars, really ridiculous stuff. I think, though, being here in Florida, one of the neatest welcomes I got was right out here in the lobby. The gentleman out there selling books. And I walked up, and he says, Herb Sherman? I said, yes. My name is so-and-so, and I was taken aboard a police cruiser. I thought that was neat. The United States Air Force Condon Committee, Blue Book Project, or however you want to say it, investigating team came down to Ashton, Nebraska to investigate me. A gentleman by the name of John Ahrens, who is a friend of mine, and a gentleman by the name of Roy Craig, who is a physicist. John Ahrens, he'd probably hit me, but he was a shrink, psychiatrist. Him and I had long discussions, and he told me to tell my story over and over and over and over, and I told it over and over and over and over. And then they found a 25-minute time lapse in my log. And John says, Herb, what happened to you between 2:30 a.m., December 3rd, 1967, and 3 a.m., or a little before 3 a.m.? And I looked at him, and I couldn't say anything because I didn't remember. So he says, you got to come to Boulder. I said, okay. So they took me up to Boulder, and I met a UFO team there of a lot of people. who run a lot of tests on me, and a hypnotist by the name of Dr. Leo Sprinkler administered time regression hypnosis on me, which found out a small detail that I had been aboard the spacecraft and that I had actually communicated with them. They played the tape back to me and it shocked me. I didn't know what to think. I said, is that really my voice on that tape? You bet it is, boy. I says, my God, what do I do now? So while I was up in Boulder, the city got real cute, the city fathers and the people in the city. The day I left, matter of fact, the night I left, they went down to our beautiful cemetery there in Ashton, Nebraska, and took this dummy and hung it by the neck in a tree, and put a big star on it, shot a hose through it and painted the hose with red like blood, and put Herb across the star with a cowboy head on it. And they really made it look big because they went down to the mortuary and they got the ambulance out, a code 3 run, sirens, red lights, the whole works. Went over there and they very carefully took it down and put it on a stretcher and covered it up and took it back to the morgue. They thought they scared me, but they didn't, you see. That's what they were trying to do. They were trying to scare me, but they didn't scare me because I thought it was kind of funny, and I laughed about it when I read it in the paper and seen all the pictures and everything. But while I was in Boulder, they blew my car up with dynamite. And that really made me mad. I just got through paying for it. And I was furious. I could have done like George C. Scott did in that movie Rage. That's how mad I was. But through the whole crisis, I had one very good friend in Ashton, Nebraska. His name was Leroy Dimmitt. Very close friend. And he helped me a lot in Ashland. He was one of our relief officers in the police department. And I was really proud to have him as a friend and his way he stuck by. My family, I really can't say. I went to my father and I said, Dad, I know you have 20-something years in the Air Force, but I asked my father point blank, I said, Dad, what do you think of UFOs? My father never said no, and he never said yes. He just said, son, if you're telling the truth, stick with it. And so I stuck with it. I thank you very much.
Crazy. Crazy. But hold on, we're not done yet.
Standing up right now, you might want to sit down for this one. On July 18th, I received an email message from some person who wants to remain anonymous, and I will honor that. But this person provided a document to me and told me I could do what I want with it. So I'm going to share with my listeners, and here we go. Background. During a 36-year career as an electronic engineer, I performed research and development for NASA on the shuttle, the National Reconnaissance Office, and CIA satellites, a Department of Defense/Air Force division formerly called the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization, now the Missile Defense Agency, for the SDI program, and ultimately worked with the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency on robotics. Some of these assignments were off books or black projects, which remain classified. And although I'm now retired, for obvious reasons, I prefer not to disclose my identity here. Suffice to say that I have never been involved in attempting to reverse engineer an alien spacecraft, and I never had much interest in the UAP phenomena until something I saw in 1997. I won't go into that now beyond saying that it motivated me to begin looking into the UAP issue. I want to begin with a brief summary of what may seem like a bit of ancient history, but please bear with me while I lay the foundation for my ultimate conclusions. Alien Presence 101. It's quite obvious that vehicles or devices employing advanced technology far beyond our present level are operating in our skies and oceans. We have thousands of reports of this going back at least to the 1940s. Next, sometime in the 1960s, cattle mutilations also began to be reported. The characteristics of these mutilations have been consistent across a large number of cases and do not appear to correspond to any sort of natural causes. The cases now number in the thousands, and there is substantial evidence to connect them with the presence of UAPs in the area. Forensic analysis of the cadavers provides important clues as to the motivation for the mutilations. In case after case, the same body parts are removed with surgical precision, the blood is drained, and the ribs are broken as if dropped from height. In addition, a substantial number of people go missing every year under circumstances which are very difficult to explain. They may meet the same fate as the cattle, but in these cases, the bodies are never found, so the cause remains unconfirmed. Another troubling phenomena which began to be reported in the 1960s was the random abduction of human beings by the Greys, apparently for the purpose of collecting genetic materials. Victims often report being paralyzed and unable to resist. Finally, although far less common, reports of UAPs disabling nuclear missiles also began to surface, the 1967 incident at Malmstrom being a good example. All this, in conjunction with an aggressive attempt to conceal UAP-related information by the U.S. military, leads me to certain very disturbing conclusions. An evaluation. In general, these actions seem to resemble the behavior of a society of advanced insects who possess the capacity of interstellar travel. It's not really that strange. In fact, it's often been said that of all creatures, insects are by far the most capable survivors. If life exists anywhere in the galaxy, the odds of them being insects are fairly high. Insects typically subsist on liquids such as blood, which they often obtain after paralyzing the victims. Blood is very high in protein and provides excellent nutrition for those adapted to feeding on it. We may note that the easiest way to extract blood from a mammal, such as a cow, is to punch through the eye socket into the brain to reach a main artery. This corresponds with the injuries repeatedly observed in cattle mutilations. Cattle are very plentiful and easily accessible. Their global population is over 1 billion, and a typical cow has 18 quarts of blood compared to only 4 for humans. While this makes them the most convenient source, we should remember that their blood is nearly identical to ours. In fact, the FDA actually approved its use for medical transfusions in 1991. Within an insect society, certain institutions would be quite natural. For example, the existence of a worker class such as the Greys, who seem to perform the more mundane tasks outside of the hive, just as worker bees gather pollen. The large eyes are also typical of insects, evolved by living in hives or underground tunnels. Regarding those humans being abducted for genetic experiments, if the Greys were themselves products of genetic engineering, it would be logical to upgrade them by incorporating any DNA which would make them more efficient workers in the particular gravity and atmosphere of a planet being colonized. This could explain the collection of human genetic material. Exploration has the goal of finding something of value to the explorer. I think it's reasonable to assume that any advanced civilization would have little need for common resources such as gold and silver. So what other valuable resource can our planet really offer other than a habitable environment and a plentiful source of food? I believe that this planet is being colonized by a species of highly advanced alien insects who feed on the blood of humans and animals. The Greys are the workers, and whatever creature gives the orders probably remains safely in the hive and has yet to be observed. Were such knowledge to become public, there would be a complete breakdown of society. Therefore, in order to gain time to do the research necessary to find a solution, a climate of social stability is required. This is why maintaining a high level of secrecy is absolutely essential. Consequently, Selected personnel within military intelligence and the CIA have been running a cover-up operation for many years. But how were they able to recognize the threat so much earlier than the present? If the military came into possession of certain evidence, they could have realized everything back in 1947. Consider that the recovery of even one crashed vehicle along with the body would have been sufficient to arrive at all of these conclusions. Although it's unlikely they could reverse engineer a vehicle, a body would have been easy to dissect even in 1947. Assuming they discovered that it was some sort of insect and found traces of human blood in the stomach, that would have provided all the necessary insights. Dr. Robert Sarbacher, a physicist attached to the Department of Defense's Office of Scientific Research and Development, headed by Vannevar Bush, stated in two separate 1983 interviews that he understood that the military had recovered an alien craft and several bodies, and he also stated they were constructed like certain insects we have observed on Earth. Following this grim discovery, some attempts were made to shoot UAPs down, but that proved futile. These attempts eventually resulted in a massive UAP overflight of the United States Capitol in 1952. After the military scrambled jets, the UAPs flew off. However, as soon as the jets left the area, the UAPs returned to their position. It was a clear demonstration of air superiority. After that time, a policy of not firing at UAPs was adopted, and the focus shifted to other approaches. Vannevar Bush, who had officially disbanded the Office of Scientific Research and Development in December 1947, 5 months after Roswell, seems to have become the head of a more highly classified group known as Majestic 12, whose purpose was to investigate the technology and intentions of the aliens. Later, when the arms race heated up in the 1960s, the aliens demonstrated an ability to deactivate our nuclear weapons. It seems they don't want us to blow the planet up now that they have a colony here. If I were to guess, I'd say the hives are located somewhere under the ocean, close enough to allow for convenient feeding while remaining well out of range of human intervention. As the colony grows, the need for blood will increase and the facts will become more difficult to conceal. In addition, more witnesses have been surfacing every day and more journalists jumping on the bandwagon. I believe things like the recent UAP hearings are nothing more than dog and pony shows intended to reassure everyone that all is well while providing virtually no specific information. It's essential to maintain that scenario in order to avoid a massive panic and enable black programs to continue unhindered. The problem is that after having admitted that UAPs do exist and they're probably of alien origin and are operating in our airspace with impunity, it begs the question of what they're doing here. The idea that they're just flying around and nothing else is ludicrous. Predators evolved by consuming the flesh and blood of other creatures. We survive that way to a large extent ourselves. We breed livestock to slaughter, but if technology permits, it's more efficient to simply go where food is abundant. The aliens do have that capability, and unfortunately for us, it looks like we're on the menu. Now, the person provides their own experience, and we'll talk about that after a short break. Okay, we are back. Now, my anonymous source talks about the experience that this person had himself or herself. It says, my experience. I mentioned that I saw something in 1997. I was living in a rural area in the hills southwest of Tucson. I was awakened one night by the sound of something scraping on my bedroom window like fingernails on a blackboard. I had a dreadful feeling that something very dangerous was trying to get in. But worse than that, I had this bizarre feeling that it was intensely hungry and needed to feed on me. I dismissed these feelings in the heat of the moment because there was no actual evidence yet, and grabbed a pump shotgun and ran to the window and flipped on the floodlights. I then saw something that I'll never be able to forget. It apparently was a tall gray. It stood about 7 feet in height, with a relatively short and thin torso, a very large head, and very long legs and arms with 3 fingers on each hand. It was moving away from the house, so I only saw it from the back, but the way it moved was incredible. The legs took long strides while the body and head remained perfectly upright and just glided smoothly along. When it reached the fence, which was about 4 feet high, it simply went right over it without breaking stride like a hurdle jumper in the Olympics. It ran into a clearing about 200 yards away, at which point a craft of some sort rose silently up and drifted away to the south. Seen edge on, I couldn't tell if it was circular or triangular, but the bottom was radiating a yellow-orange light. Just a few seconds after it flew away, 2 Air Force A-10s came in from the west, very low, and vectored north directly over my house. I've never seen A-10s fly that low, especially after dark. I thought perhaps it knew I had a shotgun and was scared off, but in retrospect, I doubt that was the reason. I suspect it had some way of knowing the A-10s were approaching, so it decided to leave the area before they arrived. I think if it wasn't for those A-10s, I might not be here today. Because of my need for employment and obtaining clearances, I didn't report this event to anyone. There was, however, another witness to the UAP. A young man who I had met a few times was vacationing in a small trailer just to the south of my house. I met him the next day and he reported the UAP to me without any prompting. He gave exactly the correct time and said he saw it at a very low altitude. It was an unambiguous and very disturbing confirmation of the event. A few days later, I stopped at a small cafe down the road and inquired about the young man. I was told he had stopped for coffee with his trailer hitched up and seemed very agitated. He said he was getting out of here as fast as he could, and I certainly don't blame him. In addition to that, I also found scratches in the glass of my bedroom window and some large footprints which appeared to have 3 toes. This had a profound effect on me, including repeated nightmares, boarding up my windows, and eventually abandoning the house entirely. Some people might think this experience colored my judgment, but I am afraid that's not the case. After more than 20 years of examining everything I could find on the subject, it all seems to point in the same direction. And rather than being a mere anomaly, my own experience only serves to support the conclusion that our planet is being colonized by a species of alien parasites that feed on human and animal blood. Further thoughts. Psychotronic warfare goes beyond mere paralysis. It involves the altering of consciousness to make potential victims more passive and unsuspecting. In the case of the Phoenix Lights, each person who saw the triangle seemed to be psychologically altered and had the conviction that the aliens were here to help us. In another case, Stephen Greer clearly experienced a dramatic personality change following an encounter, and he now leads groups of people into remote areas where they also have similar encounters and return psychologically altered. The aliens definitely gather and make use of intel. The 1952 air superiority demonstration above the United States Capitol building being an obvious example. For this reason, it is essential that the development of advanced weapons and countermeasures must occur at locations which are completely unknown to any person not directly involved, including elected officials and bulk of the military. It should be assumed that well-known research facilities are not secure. It is essential that the production of high-tech components occur within the United States. Purchasing such items from China is not wise. In the event of an active military conflict with the aliens, the Chinese will wish to retain these components for their own use, and we will not be able to restore production very quickly, if at all. Luis Elizondo cited 5 observables. I believe there is yet another. It has been noted that one craft can separate into 2 or smaller units which can act independently. Orbs as small as a basketball can merge with others to form into a much larger craft. This implies the use of nanotechnology, which makes it very difficult to completely destroy them in a single action, and also provides them with the ability to penetrate small or confined spaces. Advanced research should focus on direct energy weapons, psychotronic blocking and shielding, robotics, and artificial intelligence, and the development of hyper-deadly neurotoxins. In the event of direct confrontation, the aliens may seek to neutralize world governments while leaving attacked the bulk of the population on which they feed. The merit of the robotic warriors is that they can take action autonomously without further human direction. Ultimately, robotics and AI may constitute a natural evolution of the human race. When I worked for DARPA, one of the engineers referred to the robots as our children. It took me a while to wrap my head around it, but I came to see the light. The robots will be stronger and smarter and better in every way. And if we can't defeat the aliens in open battle, once a majority of the human population has been replaced by robots, their source of food will have dried up, and they'll be forced to go elsewhere for more. And that's it. So, I don't know. I mean, this sounds, the fact that, we still don't have any answers from the government. This might be the reason, and the reason that they can't talk about it is because think about it. I mean, if they're here to feed on us, then, that will cause a panic. There'll be a lot of people who aren't going to be able to deal with that information. And these things are insect-like. I mean, people who've seen them, people who've been abducted say they reminded them of insects, and insects, as we know, they feed on blood, a lot of them, right? The praying mantis, for instance, all kinds of bugs, fleas, blood, they drink blood. And if they're intelligent, I mean, yeah, it just kind of makes sense. I mean, when you really think about it, I mean, in David Jacobs, he wrote a book called The Threat, where it was, he came to the conclusion after, hypnotizing, putting a lot of people, alien abductees, under hypnotic regression, and then, culling as much information from these people under hypnosis as possible. And he came to the conclusion that there's these alien beings, and there's a hierarchy. There's the short grays, and there's these taller grays, and then there's these praying mantis type beings that are in charge, standing in the corner in the shadows of a lot of these abductions, basically, barking out orders, apparently. And is that what's happening here? Is that like in his book, The Threat? He doesn't know. He said the threat. In the threat, he said that there was going to be a takeover, that these aliens, he came to the conclusion that these aliens at some point soon, and this was back in the 90s when this book came out, but he came to the conclusion that the aliens at some point soon were going to have a takeover. They were going to just take control of the planet. And is that how they're doing it? I mean, basically they're modifying some of their own by using our DNA, so they're better suited for our planet. And then once they achieve that goal, right, and then the sky's the limit for them, and they can just take over the planet, and we're just food, and along with the cows, and maybe we're food right now. I mean, I've read some different reports over the years where there were carcasses, corpses of humans that were, had the same kind of, the same kind of mutilation as a cow. They're mutilated the same way, with their eyes taken out. In fact, there was a case in Pennsylvania sometime during the 2000s that I tried to get some information about, but it just seems like it's covered up to the point where you just can't talk to anybody. So maybe for the most part, maybe what happens is maybe that's a lot of people who disappear. Maybe that's what's going on with them, and then their bodies are just dumped in the ocean. If they start dumping them around in pastures like they do with cows, then people would really be questioning. So they know better to, hey, we'll just take these along with us and dump them in the ocean. Is that what's going on? Is that what's happening? And actually, it makes sense. This actually makes the cover up make more sense now. I mean, most of the time I always say it's probably because of the military implications. Yeah, there's military implications, but not in the way I thought. I would say, well, and a lot of other UFO researchers like Stanton Friedman, the late Stanton Friedman, would say, like, the biggest deal is whoever comes up with this technology first will rule the world. Well, maybe that's not really the reason. Maybe the government has suspected since the late 40s that these insects are here to conquer us and basically feed on us. Maybe we're not that special. Maybe there's, a lot of scientists say there's, billions and billions of other planets in the universe that have life on it. we're just another one, and this advanced race found us, right? And is going to use and it's going to colonize this planet and basically use us as food. I know it sounds insane, but this makes sense. This person, I can't reveal the name. This person makes a lot of sense. This makes sense. This explains a lot. Is it true? Could be.
It's amazing stuff. So listen, guys, the way I'm going to go out today is we're going to be over at the Leak You Paranormal channel. I'm about to light that channel up. And essentially what we're going to listen to is some interviews that took place after the crash in Roswell. So I want to get a lot of that documented. And I will drop a link, all right, to where I will be streaming. If you all want to come through, feel free. I need some watch hours on this channel anyway. But no, we're going to sit down and listen to some very interesting interviews. Before I check up out of here. Shout out to the Leak You community. Please join us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music.
Please hit the like. Thank you.
The judgment sentence that you are an asshole. The trial is over. Thank you, everybody.
Let's play a game. You have 10 seconds to take all your stuff and get out of my life. 10.